remember hearing during the pandemic that a lot of repercussions were sort of at peace because we weren't flying so many places, and the environment was sort of recuperating a little bit during the pandemic. Is that something you've seen in your work?
Well, I know that in the first year of the pandemic, that air quality improved because traffic was so reduced. But very quickly, within a year, apparently according to taxi drivers, traffic was pretty much back to normal.
That's my understanding as well, and for various reasons, some very painful, people still don't have the faith they had in mass transit previously. And every time I get on the train, as I did this morning to come down to the city to be with you, it's both a less of a carbon footprint to get on that Metro North, but also a little bit of a, reaffirming of what we have to do. And it doesn't take a lot of courage because the risk is so infinitesimally low that anything will go wrong. But still, you have to have faith in what's going to get us out of this carbon crisis, and make the mass transit system everything it possibly can be.
Yes, Catherine.
Oh, this is so cute. We were talking about coastal resilience, or you all were, and being as you were from Riverkeeper for so long, and Peggy being in Harlem, I'd like to ask you about underserved communities all up and down, not only the Hudson, but the coastlines, as far as climate change and sea rise.
So when I was with Riverkeeper, I was very proud to work all the way up beyond the point in the Hudson where the tidal section ends, which is around Troy, all the way up into the Adirondack Mountains. And the disparity of communities and the disparity of political power is so tremendous. One of the areas where we worked hardest to develop some new approaches to get political power into communities right on the river was in Troy, in North Troy, where the community did not have good access to riverfront amenities the way so many other communities will, and didn't have the resources to make those riverfront areas resilient against storms and allow them to grow and adapt as the sea level went up. Same in Poughkeepsie, same in Newburgh, same in so many communities. And you will find the communities that are consciously working towards that kind of justice, like Kingston is a wonderful example in Ulster County, that those communities become so much stronger, to an earlier point that we were trying to make about communities being more successful together. So we do want to continue to strengthen the voices of those in places like Troy and Newburgh and Poughkeepsie and Albany and Rensselaer and so many other communities that have not had the advantages that some of the other communities have had.
And for those who are online, I just opened, and either we can figure out how you can speak if you unmute yourself. I think that Peter can help us with that, or you can text us or put in chat your question if you have, and we can either all read it, but I can read it out loud for you. But there is right now nothing there. So are there any questions? Yeah, Peggy, sorry. Yeah. It should be on. Or I can bring...
Hello?
Yeah.
Yes. So yeah, access to the waterfront, access to open space is an important environmental justice concern. I know on 125th Street at the West Harlem Pierce Park. That park is now there because some of us came together and organized a couple of hundred people to develop a plan for the waterfront. And the reason we did that was that we saw all of the investment going to the Hudson River Park down here and from Battery Park on up. The investment in Riverside Park, which is so beautiful, right here on the Upper West Side. And as soon as you got to 123rd Street, there was this gap where, if you were walking or biking up the riverfront, you would have to get off your bike. You couldn't continue because we had fairway parking on our waterfront. And so by organizing people coming together and developing a plan, we were able to then get our elected officials to support it and get the mayor to support it. And eventually, within 10 years, it was built and it's open. And it's a wonderful, about a 2-acre, beautiful access to the Hudson River. But a lot of communities, especially low-income communities, don't get that investment. You'll find kids in this, right here in New York City, who have never been over to the Hudson River waterfront, who don't even know what a river is, who don't know how to swim or recreate on the waterfront. So all of those kinds of issues are of concern in lower income communities where they haven't had that investment. And so we see more and more communities, like up in the Bronx with the Bronx River, groups coming together to clean up that river and, allow it to be important access for families and children in the Bronx. So, yeah, thank you for that question.
And thank you very much for that endeavor, because now we can bike all the way from one tip of Manhattan to another, for instance, and enjoy the kids playing basketball there under those superstructures of highways and so on. And it's marvelous. Thank you.
And I think it also shows that just because something is a community issue doesn't mean that if it's addressed, it won't benefit everyone in the whole city.
Yes, I'm coming.
Thank you. I remember reading an article in the New York Times some time ago, I don't know, a year or so, about a project called the Big U, which is supposed to protect the, southern part of Manhattan. And I remember what was so frustrating about reading it is all the community groups fighting against each other, and it didn't sound like anything was ever going to get done. What's the status of the Big U?
It's in 45 seconds if I can. The city has an East Side Coastal Resilience portion of the Big U at Lower Manhattan. You can think of it as an U. And the on the right, the East Side Coastal Resilience Project is being built. It's being built in a way that is completely contrary to the way the community in the city envisioned it, because the city and the community did a joint planning process that the city then threw out and built it a very different way. And it's an example of how hard it is to get community input and do it right. And I think the problem probably was that the city didn't have the right people at the table to plan side by side with the community. And then when they came up with this plan, they said, well, we can't build that. So we've got to do things more truly collaboratively, as opposed to this superficial level of collaboration, which has traditionally been the case. So in my last 5 seconds, you've got to sit down side by side and really be at the right table to do the planning together, and not have the other table where the real decisions get made.
No, I agree totally.
Any other questions? Or yes.
Well, as it pertains to alternate sources to fossil fuels, I heard someone of Native American descent say that the copper needed would be coming out of, grounds that are sacred. And then I didn't know how to respond to that. I wanted to know, is there any truth to the fact that we would need new copper ore to do, some of the things that we're talking about? And is there an issue with it coming from, certain places?
Copper, lithium, so many other elements that go into all of the high-tech solutions to the climate crisis, especially as we need to store wind and solar energy for the times when the sun isn't shining and the wind isn't blowing. And yes, there are sites on native lands, there are sites in countries with very low levels of commitment to environmental quality, and there are unintended consequences of so many of the things that we need to do. And while this is a little aspirational, I talked about how I like to be practical as much as possible, you don't solve these critical challenges without really grappling with them with the communities who are most affected. These are not communities that created the climate crisis. We're the community that created the climate crisis. Though to be fair to New York City, we use less personal vehicles and we use less energy per household. So we're doing okay on a lot of levels. But what can be the dialogue that could lead to means in which we can get the materials we need in ways that are, there's this term extractive, and here it has two meanings. You've got to extract them from the ground, but you can't extract the quality of the community from the community while you're doing that. That is so difficult, and that is why we have to sit down for a very sincere dialogue about what can be done to do this in a non-extractive, extractive way.
Yeah, I think a number of activists call some of these technological fixes false solutions. They are not all false solutions. I think what they really mean is that we're using a new technology to decrease carbon and to improve environmental quality, but it's causing more problems to the same communities that are already disproportionately impacted. And so when people say false solutions, they say, well, why put billions into carbon capture and sequestration, which is not proven to be successful or effective, when we need billions going to clean up the legacy of pollution, or billions going to invest in energy upgrades so that all of our buildings can be electric. I mean, just think about it. We've been doing a pilot study to swap out gas stoves and swap in electric induction and heat pumps. And it took us almost 6 months to find a landlord who would let us do this collaborative project. A lot of them wanted to, and then they did the estimate on the cost of upgrading their electric grid to allow so much more electric demand, and said it was too expensive. And so it took us 6 months just to find a building where we could do this pilot study. So my point is that some communities are so behind that they need a pre-investment to accept the investment to upgrade to electric and solar and so many other, possibly technological fixes. So really thinking about the unintended consequences of some of these things. For instance, in Louisiana, they thought that some of these petrochemical and plastic companies would go out of business, and that maybe they would really see reduced impact. But guess what? Those industries that have an oil refinery are now going to become carbon capture. And they're now going to use that land and those facilities to transition into something else that they feel they can make money off of. So the same communities are still going to be burdened by some certain kinds of facilities.
I have here a question from France. We had a Worshippers Global. And can you say what 2 feet sea rise would mean for Manhattan?
2 feet of sea level for Manhattan would put 500,000 to 800,000 more people into flood zone A. That's, I think, the most basic thing that I can say. And it would, of course, mean that some of our infrastructure would no longer be viable. Roads, electric lines, and water supply. Our water treatment plants would no longer have gravity working for them in terms of getting the wastewater treated and out into the receiving waters. It would make large swaths of the city either impossible to live in or certainly at least more challenging to live in. And that's why, of course, we have to be working on both mitigation, which is reducing the loading of carbon, and adaptation, which is dealing with the change that we are unable to prevent from happening.
And probably not only in Manhattan. I was thinking like recently I was riding by train from Boston to New York, and half of the path is along the shore, where you are barely that high above sea, at least on when the tide is in, you know. And I was thinking, you know, what is going to happen with all of that? But you know, yeah.
Within your own organization or initiatives that you know of in our community, how can an individual in our church take action?
So we're working on a number of important climate and environmental pieces of legislation at the state level. There are lobby days. There is the ability to call your elected official and state your support for certain outcomes. Also here in New York City, we have an Environmental Justice Advisory Committee, and the mayor has not appointed a new head of it. And there's not much of a budget for it, yet it is supposed to be developing a citywide study and a plan to address environmental justice. So again, we can all pick up the phone, tell the mayor what he needs to do. We can write a letter. So all of those things are very important. Joining as a member of an organization is something we welcome. We have monthly membership meetings where we discuss policies that we're working on, different campaigns. We're working on a really fun campaign to get the toxins out of cosmetics and hair products and skin lighteners that are marketed to women, but primarily and especially women of color. You know, that's something that affects everybody, as well as men, because men use colognes and shaving lotions actually directly on their face, and the phthalates and other kinds of toxins that you know, impact the endocrine system as well as the reproductive system. So there are numerous projects we could talk about. Extreme heat is another one. We know that sea level rise might not flood us all every year, but we know extreme heat is going to increase every year and impacts the most vulnerable. So many, many ways that I'm sure we would all welcome your support.
And only very briefly to amplify what Peggy has said, New York State has a process known as the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act, and they're taking comment on their climate action plan for the next 2 weeks. And again, I'll provide information on that to Pastor Andrew. And Peggy is on the White House Environmental Justice Advisory Committee, and they're taking public comment until May 25th. And as I said earlier, the administration in Washington and in Albany and in many other states, they're trying to do better. They're trying to do restorative justice through projects like Justice 40. But Justice 42 is woefully underfunded in terms of its implementation. These laws don't make themselves happen
enforceable.
in the world. They need
They're
to
not
be implemented by
enforceable.
agencies that have not only the fervor, but the resources. So appeal for the resources for these agencies to do the job right, and then there is that partnership possibility that I talked about.
It's counterproductive too.
Yes.
I have a question maybe of a more personal nature, but all of this information about the environment has always, just in my perspective, gotten worse and worse, and it's very heartening to hear people like you that have obviously dedicated their lives to trying to fix this problem. And my question is, how do you keep optimism personally in the face of, what it just seems that it's getting always worse?
Well, I'll speak for myself. I think to be an activist, you must be an optimist, because these issues, sometimes you can have a vision for an outcome and it can actually happen in a year, and then sometimes it takes 18 years. And you've got to stick with it. You've got to really be committed to that kind of work. And just repeat your question. I think I forgot it.
How do you stay optimist in this moment in the environment?
There are wins. Every time I walk past the West Harlem Pierce Park, I have a big smile on my face. I feel so good that there's something tangible that's impacting the community in a positive way. We've got, 6 or 7 pieces of strong environmental legislation through the state and through the city in the last 5 or 6 years. There's some things that we haven't gotten passed, but there's a lot that we have. And so we feel good about that. There are wins. They may not make the front page of the New York Times, all of them, but communities are winning, and that's what keeps us going for the challenges that we continue to have as well.
So it's funny, I can't give you a good answer because I tend to be a little more mechanical. I tend to be not optimistic or pessimistic. I just look at the goal and I do what I can to get there, and I know that some goals will succeed and some goals will not. But I think if you just stay focused, you'll start to make progress. As Peggy said, things succeed. And then you'll realize that it's worth that hard effort. One of Peggy's colleagues on the White House Environmental Justice Advisory Committee, a scholar named Kyle White, gave some classes. I take classes as well as give classes at Columbia. And he talked about, he doesn't want to hear people talk about, I hope there'll be change, especially if they're powerful people. Because if they're powerful people, they just need to be looking at that point and figuring out how to get closer to that point. And then they give other people who don't have power hope. So I just realized that I have some responsibility as I teach students or as I work on the Resilient Coastal Communities Project. And I just, whether I'm optimistic or pessimistic, I just try to stay focused on the goal.
And And if I may preach here a little bit like I preach to children, you need to find your community with whom you can log and stay stronger. Because if we are alone, we are alone. But if you have a community, it will help you. So in the time of doubt, it will lift you up. And there'll be occasions where you can lift up someone else. So that is part of my preaching, my apology for intervening here, but I thought that, bringing, locking it together with our children message was in place. Are there other questions, please? Do you have any kind of message for us? You talked a lot, but I see.
I was just going to say, as a congregation, just come together, figure out a vision for something you all want to do together to make a difference in climate or the environment, whether it's right here in the neighborhood or in the city, and come together and collaborate and create some change that improves your lives here, whether it's just in this congregation or on the block or in the neighborhood. Make some things happen and be able to have the confidence in that collaboration, because then you can dream even bigger and achieve even more.
Thank you. And I'll just say thank you for what you're doing, and thank you even more for what you're going to do.
And we thank you for coming, spending with us your Sunday, and sharing with us your talents, your energy, your vision. And we want to send you with a blessing and a deep thank you for all you do for our broader community and for this world. Thank you very much.